Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Nomadic Archivists Project channel. This is a dedicated space for those of us across the global Black world who are passionate about archiving Black history, culture, genealogy, legacy building, anything where we can really talk about how we can preserve the things that we treasure most. So my name is Miranda.
Hi, and I'm Steven. How are you guys doing this evening?
Today we will be, let's see if we have people in the chat. So we also want to preface this. So this is one of our first live chats ever.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are exploring this new territory. One of the things that we really want to do at the Nomadic Archivists Project is to really get as many people in the diaspora or across the global South to really start be the leaders in thinking about preservation and telling their own stories. So we thought, what a better way to kind of have some of these conversations than to have a channel. So if you are here with us today, please say hello in the chat. We're really excited to be on this journey with you. In today's episode, just to preface things a little bit, today's episode will really be discussing, the deep emotional impact of losing memorabilia and family keepsakes, those cherished items that connect us to our histories, identities, and loved ones. This conversation feels especially urgent as we witness the devastating fires sweeping across Los Angeles right now and destroying homes, historic landmarks, entire communities, including historically Black neighborhoods, rich with cultural significance.
Yeah.
Loss, right? Loss for most of us, we face it at some point in our lives, in one way or the other. It's one of those inevitable things that we all go through. So sometimes when we're talking about material culture, it could be in the form of, a family heirloom, like a handwritten letter or a necklace, your grandmother's necklace or a childhood photo. The objects that often serve as these tangible links to our roots, shaping our understanding of who we are, where we come from. But when those physical pieces of our past are lost, how do we not only grieve, but begin to heal? How can memory work help us preserve the stories and legacies that remain, even when the objects are gone, right? And so this is what Stephen and I are going to get into today. And, we invite you, we're going to tell some of our own personal stories of loss. We definitely invite you to as well. And let's just sort of talk about ways that we've learned to heal through some of these challenges.
And thank you for saying that, Miranda, because I think we think of loss primarily in terms of physical items, but I do like it that we're expanding or we're trying to incorporate and think about what memory does for us. We still have us, we're still here. And in that, I just want to start out by saying we send our love and our support and our financial support to the folks in California who have lost entire livelihoods, their houses, their neighborhoods. I was reading some of the stories today, and they're just not just devastating, but we're talking about long-term loss. And part of what we would like to share with you today, again, as Miranda says, some of our stories of loss, but how we've been able to think about it and to mitigate some of that loss through storytelling, through retrieval, through lots of things. But first, people need to be healthy, and they need settled, and they need water and shelter and these kinds of things. And so that's why it's especially prescient that we are talking about this matter today.
Yeah, right. We thought about different ways in which to sort of think about having these conversations, especially right now, when, something is actively still happening to people and communities. And, really wanted to kind of sort of sit with this.
Mm-hmm.
But knowing that, these losses come in a lot of different forms. Sometimes they come in the form of a natural disaster, a house fire or a hurricane or something else that happens to us. Sometimes it comes in the form of movement, right? When we're either moving because we want to or we're forced to move, and something that we cherish either gets lost in the move or we can't bring it for whatever reason. Losses happen that way. sometimes loss just happens because people don't really understand the value of something, or that this something that they have that might have belonged to them might be valuable to someone else, right? So it could be, your mother's journal, or, a diary that she kept, that she's thinking, well, nobody's going to want to see or hear or read any of this stuff that I've written down. I'm just going to throw it away. And so the loss comes in a lot of different ways. So we'd love to hear, before we, sort of jump in with some of our own stories of loss and like sort of how we got over it, or how we learned to heal from the loss. Love to hear from anyone in the chat if they have a particular
story
loss that they want to touch on. Yeah. Thank you, Stephen.
Mm-hmm. And so that we don't have any dead air, I want to pull out something very briefly. I was on Facebook earlier this week, and a woman who lost her house in 2018 basically gave us a sensibility about the kinds of ways we can support people. And one of the things she said, simply tell people that we're glad that they're safe and that we are there for them, whatever they need, and tell them, let them tell you their story when they're ready to tell it. So instead of saying, hey, I've got some extra jackets, do you need them? You don't want to put them in a position where they have to make another decision or can I come over and bring dinner at 7:00? It's like they're not sure where they're going to be necessarily. You have to be really open and fluid, but just really be loving and be flexible in the kind of support that you need. And I think we might have a question in the chat.
I'm going to put it up. Actually, this is from Tanya, and Tanya states that during an urgent move, they had to leave their father's Wellington piano behind. And I can understand that, right? So it's a fast move, and a piano is a huge object. And so I can imagine how difficult that was, because there was a decision that, Tanya, I'm guessing your family had to make, right? It was probably a really difficult decision that you had to make. Not sure when this happened, but how have you been able to make peace with that decision, or has your family been able to make peace with that decision? Thanks for sharing that story with us. I want to say, we have another, Stephen, if you want to read this one.
Sure. I lost a collection of posters / art that I had been gifted when I had to do a swift move. Yes, I completely feel you on this. And when you lost it, I would love for you to tell us about the decision to leave it behind, or was it something you want to share publicly with us? Because loss of these sort of physical items that someone, as Miranda mentioned in her opening statement, may not mean a lot to somebody else, but seems to maybe mean a lot to you. Can you share a little bit about that?
What I'm also seeing is there's a connection between yours and the previous comment about urgent moves and having to move quickly. And I think that's the time when loss is probably going to be more prevalent, right, and appear more, when we have to do things quickly. And this is one of the reasons why we sort of think about, we think about the things that we have and making a plan for them in case something does happen, right? An inevitable thing that happens, but always a tragic thing, such as a loved one who passes away, right? And those are the times when you don't really want to think about, what to do with their things. You don't want to have to make those decisions because you're grieving, right? And I can imagine what is going on right now with everyone who has lost their home or their neighborhood in LA. You're grieving, you're still in shock, you're trying to figure out what to do. And in those moments when you have to make an urgent decision or you have to move quickly, I can imagine that for a lot of us, that's when we suffer the most loss.
So the Orin Orinlanis, if I spell, forgive me if I mispronounce your name. You also gave us some context, Miranda. If you would check the chat and put the additional context up, yeah. And let's see. Relatedly, I work at a museum and often have an existential moment about why we do what we do. When, as a colleague put it, one day you could go into storage, open a box, and the object could be gone.
Hmm.
And furthermore, she said, if I have your pronouns correct, it wasn't my decision. Unfortunately, I had broken my leg and folks moved it for me. Yeah, yeah. And there have been many times when I've helped people move, or as an archivist at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture back before I left in 2017, we went on a lot of site visits. And sometimes the person who invited us out to do the site visit thought they had something that was gone. And then maybe a family member or a child was like, no, you left that stuff, or you threw that stuff away. You said you didn't want it. So there was some intention on one hand to save it, but then for some reason they decided not to keep it or bring it along and put it in storage or bring it to the new house. I'm a big advocate for rebuilding, and that rebuilding could take place when it, for example, when it comes to photographs or other kinds of things you can get copies of, great. Other things like posters and books and things, I I look for those things. I'm a collector in that way. Nothing's really the same because it's not the original thing that you got that may be inscribed or have a certain value to it. But I do like rebuilding. Rebuilding is
Yeah.
probably one of the archival tenets.
Yeah. And yeah, and where it sounds like you really didn't, obviously you weren't involved with the move. So, um, for something like that too, it's harder too when it's kind of like out of our hands. Like there's, really nothing that we can do about it. I want to go back to your point on, museum collections or archival collections. I've been thinking about this as well recently because we often think, if something happens to us, we give something to somebody else. We either give it to a friend or a family member or an institution like a museum or an archive or a library that we hope that they will safeguard it. But in, everything that's happened in LA, the destruction happens to the, entire neighborhoods, right? And so that your family member or your friend could be in your neighborhood. That library or museum could also be swept up in that natural disaster. And, for things like that, we just have to remember that even when we try to do what we can to mitigate any kind of loss and to protect our things as much as we can, but we know that at some point, there's only so much that we can do. And that at some point, most things that we think, will be here forever are really ephemeral. And one of the things I think that has helped me heal is this idea of memory work, which Stephen was talking about a little bit earlier. Just being able to, you don't have the physical objects anymore, but you still have the stories. And so when it comes to an object that you might have had, or it comes to a neighborhood that, there were historic sites and you can remember, that restaurant, that's been there for like 100 years. It was like a neighborhood staple, and now it's gone. And this could happen for a lot of different reasons when it comes to neighborhoods, but to be able to tell the stories about what happened in those spaces, what happened at that local restaurant, or that object that, that thing that meant so much to you, to be able to tell the stories to other people and to be able to share those stories is a way that I've healed from some of the loss that I had suffered. I know for me, when I was born, my grandfather died a couple of months before I was born, and he was living in Memphis, Tennessee. I was born in New York. We were going to go down, and my parents were going to take me to see him when I was born a few months later, but he had passed away like right before. So I never got to know my grandfather. I never really had a chance to. He never had a chance to get to know me. And I didn't really. I didn't get to experience his house. I didn't get to experience his voice, none of that. So I had nothing really tangible. I had a few photographs of my grandfather, but not a lot. And so I always grew up with this sort of longing to know more about him and wanting to have more of his things. And I'm somebody who believes that I can kind of get, information from the things that people leave behind. Um, and so fast forward to, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I was at a family garage sale. My brother was having a garage sale and my dad was there, and he was selling all this cast iron stuff for, I don't know, nothing. And a lot of people bought it because I'm sure they were buying it for the metal to sell for something. And I watched it all happen. Like, I wasn't thinking about it. I wasn't asking any questions. I just watched as my dad sold all of these antique looking cast iron things away to people who stopped on the street. And then later on, I was telling my dad that I wished I had something of his father's. And he was like, well, I sold it all. And I was like, when did you sell it? And I sold it and you were right there. You were standing right there when I sold all this stuff. Right. And so for me, I didn't know even to ask him those questions of like I didn't think to at that time. Right. Because you're just doing things and you're out and about and you're talking to people and you're enjoying the day and not really thinking about like, oh, is this, a family heirloom, something that I might want to hold on to. And even with my archival background, I didn't think to ask him those questions. And I was absolutely devastated when he told me about it because I did feel horrible not asking him those questions. And he just didn't see the value in it. He was like, there's just old objects that he used. He was a sharecropper. And so he had a lot of tools from, running like soybean and cotton farms in the South. And he had all these tools. And my dad was just like, he's kind of a minimalist. And so he's just like, no, I have to, I just wanted to get rid of all this stuff that was, sort of taking up space in my basement. So it's really difficult to kind of see and to know that happened. Now my father knows before he throws away things to ask me first. Check with me first, right. But he was really sad at the time. But, now I talk to my dad more about his father and I talk to his brother and sister more about their upbringing and like what it was like in his house, to just still get a sense of like who my grandfather was. And so, although I don't have those objects to hold on to, I still feel like I'm continuously, and obviously I'm getting my grandfather from my father. He's definitely in there. But those are some of the ways now that I sort of think about that loss.
That's really lovely. Oh, so we've got some comments in the chat. Ori Loniche, or Ori, thank you so much, also commented that she likes the idea of rebuilding, but so often it feels like a thing is lost. You just have the memories of it. And I think that's true. And that feels something that Tanya sort of followed up with, which is the loss was hard because it was originally her grandfather's piano, which was passed down to her father, who now cannot pass it down to his. And what happens is that you turn to photographs, you turn to home videos, you turn to other things that mark that memory. So I definitely feel strongly about, particularly if it means something to you, that you do what you talk about, Miranda, which is you get the story and you kind of start to piecemeal this person, through his children or through people who knew him or through photographs and these kinds of things. And so the harder thing I was thinking about with Tanya, the piano and this idea of legacy and, and heirloom is really powerful for folks of African descent who in some cases don't have the ability economically to hold on to some of these larger things. Or in the case what you said, Miranda, that your father wasn't thinking about those things that way. And also, it's a kind of an acquired thing. Either you're born sometimes with this curiosity about family and a richness for, or a taste for things. My mother passed in 1997, so I have some of her stuff and I knew I needed it. but at that time I didn't know I needed it, but I wanted it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Lee mentions something in a comment as well. If you could put it up, which I think is important as well, which is fortunately I haven't lost anything, but I often feel guilty about holding it. I often don't think my items are important or worth keeping. So Lee, why do you keep them? That's the question I have.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Because that impulse is signifying or speaking to something. My father he collected baseball caps, ashtrays, and other things. But he also had lots of pictures of us on the wall, his children on the wall, and his relatives.
Mm.
And so I have pictures of those pictures on the wall because it's important for me. By that time, I was in the archives and I was in the genealogy, and I knew that not only did I want to see it, but I'm also thinking about what my descendants and my cousins and nieces and nephews and all those folks might want to see in the future, to know something about their grandfather, great grandfather, that kind of thing.
Right. I mean, I think it's kind of hard because like what you were saying, Stephen, like some things you gravitate towards this need to sort of collect and keep things and pass it down. But when you come from families that don't really do that, are not like, here,
Mm-hmm.
let's pass this on down to you. This is not something that is a ritual, right? And that's, I feel like, is when things don't get passed down, or maybe in Lee's case, and I don't know this for a fact, Lee, but then you sort of are, you're kind of like left in this vague space of like, well, what is an heirloom, or what should I keep, and why, and for whom, and why am I actually doing this? So I'm sure there's a reason deep down, Lee, why you are holding on to these things. Obviously, they're meaningful to you, but there might be something else that's driving you to do that. But I think for a lot of us, there's always a question mark of like, who's going to care about this besides me? And who's going to, how is this going to be meaningful to other people? I think that, that value piece is a hard one for people to wrap their minds around at times.
I'll be honest with you. I feel like the collector needs to be concerned about the collecting, and maybe 75% of that and 25%, maybe even less, about what's going to be carried on. Because you want it to go on. Say it's different with genealogy, where there may be some descendants who have expressed an interest. But when it comes to collections, it's necessary for that person to, like, the impulse is there. And I feel like the rationale for someone else to take it on or to value it will come, but it can't be the reason why you do it. And that's not something that you said, but it's something that I think about from time to time when it comes to collecting. Ori said something else I thought was really important as well, because we're all either worked with institutions, and we've been doing it for institutions. And so Ori says, phew, I resonate with this. It's one thing to do this for institutions, but it's another thing to do it for family. I also want our folks to see their materials, objects, things as valuable too. Here's the thing about what they call folk art, and we just use the thing. I think that that's pretty common for people who just generally, I think people are just using
Yeah.
it, but then there'll be that one or two persons in the family who's obsessed with genealogy, obsessed with the pictures of you when you were kids, and they want to make sure that everyone has pictures of it. So they scan the photographs and they send them out during family reunions or throughout the year. I think it's harder to make something matter to someone, honestly, but that my infatuation and my love of it has infected some of my relatives. They're like, where'd you get that picture from? I'm like, I got it online. I got it at ancestry.com, because now they are digitizing yearbooks, and this is how I found a picture of my mom, her graduation picture. And it's infectious. People want to know how you get the stuff, and then they want copies of it and so forth. I like to think of it planting like little seeds here and there with people, because this, as you mentioned, as we started out with this story means everything. Having stories, we all have stories. And
it's the story behind it. I feel like it would be different, like what Tanya was saying with the piano, like knowing how many people, played that piano. That's part of your legacy line. It's not just like a piano your family picked up and nobody ever played it and it was just sitting there as like furniture. Um, but it was a part of your family. It was a way your family communicated with each other through music. And yeah, and so you need to know those stories in order to know why something sometimes is, why these things are meaningful to us, because they could seem like random objects, unless we have some of that background. Stephen, have you?
Person,
Oh,
I just want to say, there's a woman joining us, and her name is Chantel.
okay.
She has a wonderful question. If you could post it, I'll
Okay.
read it. And hi, Chantel. She says her family is from St. Kitts, Barbados, and the United States Virgin Islands. And many of our records are not digitized and hard to access unless you're back home through migration, and it's easy to lose threads. Absolutely. Yeah. It really is. I sympathize. And there's a group called DLOC, Digital Archive of Digital Library of the Caribbean.
I think
and
so.
they've been working with a lot of the Caribbean islands to get resources and computers and scanners and other things to get stuff digitized, because this stuff is at risk a lot because of weather, because poor insulation, because of a number of things.
Yeah, and I think Chantel's second comment.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, after the hurricanes and the fires burned down the archive, yeah, everything in Barbados, I feel the pressure to go back home to intentionally collect stories even more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, shall I tell you alone? One of a young PhD student at NYU is doing work just like that right now with his family in the West Indies. He's very, in the Virgin Islands. He's very interested not only in doing oral histories, but getting photographs, digitizing them so they're less vulnerable, to these changes. So, and there are other folks doing this work as well. There are a number of memory workers, people who are self-authorized, but also people who've gone through training, technical training, gone to school, but they see that need and they know it really, the way it starts at home. We can't wait for an institution to do it for us.
But it's really, I like your comment because it's also another way to sort of heal through the loss, right? And sometimes some of us heal by doing and being involved and being active and engaged. And so that's wonderful too. I mean, that's definitely a way, and then that's infectious too, because it gets other people interested, and involved, and sort of builds a community, around that healing process. Stephen, I thought, do you have a story that you want to share with us?
Yes, I think it's not sure. Are we good on time?
I think so. We're sorry this is a little wonky, everyone. We're still getting our sea legs under us as we learn how to live stream, apparently. But yes, go ahead, Stephen.
So as I mentioned, I love genealogy, and I've had a taste for it ever since I was a kid. And just as I was growing up, my father was originally from Louisiana by the way of Arkansas. He moved to Ohio in 1957, met my mom a couple years later. They got married and so forth. But he didn't tell us much about his upbringing in the South. And once he got around to doing it, I started, reaching out to people, getting to know folks and whatnot. I found out that his grandfather, my great grandfather, their second house burned down. And so this is where a lot of the photographs were, a lot of the official documents, who knows, manumission papers, we don't really know because now a memory.
What's a manumission paper for anybody who doesn't know?
Well, these are papers that an enslaved person would get that would grant them freedom.
Mm-hmm. The identification that they would have to carry on them so that they weren't.
Show me your papers.
Re-enslaved. Right.
I have thoughts, so I'm a little frustrated with that idea. But one of the things I've been able to mitigate against those losses, my great aunt Ruby who was my father's aunt. My father was one of 15, my grandfather, Stephen, was one of 15 kids, two different families. But his sister, Ruby, is in her 80s, and she has an amazing memory. I interviewed her about 4 times, and I want her memory. I hope that I got that gene, because she not only remembers people's names and their birth dates and their death dates, she remembers nicknames and habits and where people live. I mean, my great grandfather was he was a short man, but very loud man. So you could hear him coming. And I was like, oh, okay. I guess that's my granddad. I feel like that guy, right? So I think the stories help to, or at least the stories for me, helped me ground myself in a way that a few of the photographs I have of him, I got some stories and I got some other things, that made him more fleshed out for me. So I really appreciate that, as well as other relatives. And I have his name, so I'm Stephen Fullwood. So yeah.
Oh, nice. So you have a spirit as well.
Yes.
Yes. Well, I think we're gonna wrap up for today, but definitely want to thank everyone for being in conversation and community with us today. I mean, our hope is that we build out this space that we can sort of all together talk about the things that we're doing, and that we're passionate about when it comes to our stories and our favorite things that we hold on to, and just ways to preserve those things. And so we hope to have a few more live streams sort of on this topic of protecting our materials, trying to hope mitigating loss, especially when there's a disaster, in just some ways. And so the next couple of episodes that we'll do, or live streams that we'll do, will be a little bit more on some of the things that we can do to help protect our materials. Yes. So we hope to see you again. Please, come back and be in community with us again.
Everything's not lost. Somebody got something. This is one of the things. It's one of the things that drive me and Miranda and a lot of our other colleagues, memory workers, to preserve Black global history. So thank you so much for coming.
Yes.